Hi, how are you guys? Okay, so this is a new effort for us this year. It's called Competitive Advantage. And what we're looking to do is bring some of the experts in the field who are really advancing analytics on the business side to come up and share some of the great work that they're doing. This is obviously a little bit different than the panels and the research papers and the EOS talks because we're going to get down into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of some of the advanced stuff that's going on. And I'm really excited about the group that we have here. We have 3 of the leagues represented, the MLB, the NBA, and the NFL. And we also have Ticketmaster presenting on some of the cool stuff that they're doing. I hope this is really informative for you guys. And this is actually based on a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from all of you. So I'm going to turn it over to Larry, who has been shepherding this for us, and he can provide some more details.
Great, welcome. Thank you, everybody. We're going to get right into the first presentation. We're excited to introduce Chris Marinak with Major League Baseball. He's going to give us a presentation on the injury analytics, which is one of the great things that Major League Baseball has been doing over the last several years. So I'd like to invite up Chris, if you please give him a welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. So as Larry mentioned, I work for Major League Baseball. I'm in our labor relations department. Those of you who went to the presentation this morning, the panel with Rob Manfred, Rob's my boss. I work in Rob's department. We're probably best known for our work on the basic agreement with the Players Association, which we just reached in December, which will give us 21 years of labor peace in baseball. That's a big deal for us. I guess I'm one of the analytics guys that Rob mentioned who works on his team along with the lawyers. I have a business background and went to business school. So that's a little bit about my background. Working in our labor department, we do a lot of legal work, but we also do a lot of other things. So we work on salary arbitration, for example. If you check the news today, we just completed the 2 additional wild cards. I was working on that even this morning during the panel, and that was just completed. So those are the types of things that we do in our labor department. What I'll talk to you a little bit about today is technology, which is another area that we're heavily involved in. We've been doing a lot of work in the injury analytics space. I want to start the presentation with where we probably left off in the baseball analytics panel this morning, or earlier this afternoon, for those of you who were there. A lot of talk about advancing in certain areas of performance analytics and how to value players and understand what players are worth. Up on the screen, you see kind of a summary of where we are on 3 of our big metrics, pitching, hitting, and defense, understanding how to value players. I think we're at the point in baseball now where we're pretty well-defined in terms of the innovation and rigor in which we look at performance analytics, both internal to baseball and external to baseball. Internal from the traditional Moneyball perspective, what you've seen even going back 10 years ago to folks in Oakland and Billy Beane, to clubs today that are doing a lot of advanced analytics internal to baseball, but even outside of baseball. So, Bill James, Tom Tango, Baseball Prospectus, Fangraphs, these types of people and organizations are doing a lot of advanced analytical work on the performance front, and we're at a pretty good place there. We have a lot of good metrics like WAR and VORP is another one from Baseball Perspective that really do a good job at valuing players. And I think if you talk to club people, they'd say that those metrics are pretty good in terms of estimating what a player's worth. If you add on the injury piece of it, I think we're not quite where we are on the performance front. If you look historically, injuries were measured by disabled list days, which is a metric that could have an injury context to it, but also has a transactional component to it, so that it's not necessarily entirely injury-based. And if you look at some of the advanced metrics, we don't necessarily have some of those. And so we've kind of been working to catch up the injury component to where we are on the performance front. I want to tell you a little bit about why we're behind on the injury front and what we're doing to catch ourselves up. I think it really boils down to 2 pieces. It's the technology and it's the organization. And I'll highlight a couple pieces on both of those fronts to give you a feel for why it has taken so long for us to progress on the injury front. First, from the technology standpoint, you heard Mark Shapiro mention at the baseball panel that back in the 90s when they were valuing players, they were using scouting reports and the baseball encyclopedia. They were sorting through papers, and that's how they were valuing players. Well, that's kind of where we were on the injury front just a couple years ago. If you were a player and you went to get treatment, you were going into your club's training room and your trainer was filling out a sheet of paper on you and storing it in his filing cabinet. And then if you got traded to a new team, your records either stayed in that filing cabinet or they got sent over and put in a new filing cabinet. And so to understand what was happening to a player from an injury perspective was very difficult just because the information wasn't in an electronic format. Beyond that, even for the clubs that were calculating some things electronically and storing stuff in Excel, one injury on one club could be classified in one way and another club could classify it completely differently, especially the way that they do treatments and diagnose injuries. And so we had a construct where we were having 30 different approaches to managing an issue. And as you can expect, it's very difficult to analyze something when it's tracked 30 different ways. Beyond just that technology piece, there's also a privacy piece. And so if any of you have been to a doctor's office, you fill out your HIPAA form, which describes who's able to see your health information. And it's no different for players. Players have the same sensitivities to their health information that you would have as a patient going into a hospital. And so there's a lot of limitations around what we can do with sharing information and disseminating information among clubs. And so that's another area that we spent a lot of time working through. On the organizational front, sort of a similar picture to the performance front 10 years ago, where we had healthcare providers kind of behaving like scouts, where they said, look, this is medicine, it requires touch and feel, and it's an art, it's not a science. You can't just plug this person into a formula and crank out what you're supposed to do with them from a medical perspective. The same kind of thing you were hearing from scouts, right? You can't just crank these 3 guys into a formula and it'll tell you who's better than the other one. So we were facing that dynamic on one front, but on the front office side, we were facing the opposite dynamic. They were saying, look, I'm not a doctor. I'd rather deal with home runs and RBIs, and you can take your subacromial bursitis and do some research on your own, because I have no idea what that even means, right? And so we have this dynamic where it was a very complicated environment and a lot of challenges from a technology perspective. So what did we do? For the start of the 2010 season, we totally revamped our approach to tracking injuries and medical information. It was a 2-pronged approach. On the left, you'll see we started with an electronic medical record system. That system was standardized across all 30 teams. It tracked information for players on over 200 teams, professional teams, major league and minor league, and over 7,000 players a season. So you can imagine the volume of information that we have, which is one of the reasons why baseball is so conducive for doing analytics. We have such a huge volume of players, especially compared to the other sports, and this system takes advantage of that. The system was used by athletic trainers and doctors to track all the information about a player, his medical history information, his injury information, treatments that were given to the player, and really record the information of the player throughout the course of the season. So we were able to track the data and information on a player from a medical standpoint in a way that was of high quality and very accurate among different teams. On the right-hand side, you'll see the second component of our approach, the analytics component. What we were able to do is take the information from the left side and put it into a system that's de-identified. It protects player confidentiality, but it enables teams to look at trends and information and behaviors of different types of injuries and medical information so they can better understand what's happening in an injury situation. I put these two up here on purpose from left to right because I think it's very important that you start with the technology and the data when you're building an analytics system. I think people too often can rush to, let's throw it in Excel and let's crunch numbers. Well, if the data's no good, going in and crunching numbers doesn't help you. And so we spent a ton of time on the left-hand side of this equation building out the technology and building out the data structures that were needed to then enable the analytics that's now coming later. I think you'll probably see a lot of that from some of the other panelists here this afternoon, because it's applicable to anything. It's applicable to sponsorships, it's applicable to other business issues. You want to get your data right to start and then do your analytics, and I think that's the approach we took in this process. So what did this yield us? On the screen, I just picked out a couple of selected variables to give you a feel for the types of things that we're able to do now. If you rewind the clock and look at what we had before, we had the disabled list, which is what tracks the amount of time a player is on the disabled list, and it was pretty rudimentary. You could track whether he went on the disabled list for 15 days or 60 days, and you could track what he was diagnosed with, and that was it. Now we have a dramatically increased number of variables, things like what the player was doing when he was injured. So I can tell you for a hamstring injury, are players more likely to get hurt running to first base or chasing down a foul ball in the corner of right field, or running into a player or colliding at second base? We have all that information to be able to tell what types of activities are more conducive to certain injuries. Secondly, as I kind of suggested, we can also look at where on the field certain injuries are occurring. So is a hamstring injury more likely running to first base or sliding into second? And you can tell by looking at the information that's stored in this system what's happening with certain injuries. As you can imagine, that opens up the door to a lot of different analysis that can help us with player health and safety, understanding of medical information and injuries, so that we can improve player care and hopefully reduce the amount of injuries that players are having. The next slide just kind of shows you the result of all this information. So it's not just data stored in a database, we use it. We give it to clubs, we allow them to run analysis, we allow clubs to compare their performance versus the performance of other clubs, to view trends, to do analysis. This is just one page to give you kind of a feel of the types of things we can do, but there's lots of analysis that goes on behind this. And this information is shared among the clubs so that they can share best practices with each other. We can look at these tables and see, all right, who's the best club at preventing this type of injury? What are the techniques that they use to do that? Can they share that with other clubs so we can make player safety improved for all clubs and all players and work for the betterment of baseball and not just for the betterment of one team? And so this gives you a kind of example. These reports are shared on a regular basis among our medical community. For example, we have our winter meetings every year, who I'm sure some of you in the audience have been to as job seekers or just as interested parties. But it's a huge event. We spend 3 full days at the beginning of the winter meetings with our medical staff going over things like this, where we talk about new techniques and new treatments that we're using for players, and we implement new strategies to maintaining and improving player health. And so this just gives you a feel for the practical nature of what we're doing. As I mentioned in the beginning, there's an organizational component to this as well, and I think this is really the big takeaway from what we've done. We took a system that was not very well organized, people were not interacting together, and we really built what I would call an ecosystem of people working together to improve player health and understand injuries better. A lot like the ecosystem you saw that spawned out of the work that Bill James did in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. The ecosystem of these people who were working together, collaborating, working with organizations like RetroSheet and others to provide information and share knowledge so that insights and innovation were encouraged and fostered among the community. And that's what we're looking to build across Major League Baseball. The 2 big things from this slide that I'll point out is that the medical staff is entering in the information, they're doing the analysis, and they're working on helping the player. And that's the key part of it. They're working on predicting and preventing injuries, eliminating problems for players before they happen, and they're working on improving treatments for players. So they're working on how can we get this player back on the field faster? How can we improve him so he's able to perform at a higher level quicker? And it's a collaborative effort among a lot of different people in the community. To close off, I just want to talk a little bit about some of our results and what we're going to be doing going forward. As I mentioned, we're doing regular reporting and sharing of best practices. This is something that's an ongoing effort using some of the reports that I described earlier. The second point, we've now started to do coordinated research projects, which is really, for baseball, it's a really cool thing. You have the Red Sox and the Yankees competing on the field, but then behind the scenes, we're doing coordinated research where the physicians from the Red Sox and the Yankees are working together to identify how to eliminate and reduce injuries and improve treatments, because it benefits both teams. Having players on the field for longer is better for everybody. And so they can compete all they want to sign the best players and pay the most money to have the biggest payrolls, but they can also work together to build out research projects. And you'll see a couple of the projects that we're working on the screen. Concussions, which we're working on. We're doing the first ever professional shoulder study of pitchers who've had shoulder injuries among professional players. And we're doing an extensive study on hamstring injuries, which happen to be the most prevalent injury in all of baseball. So we feel like if we can attack hamstring injuries and reduce that problem, it'll make a big impact on the amount of time that's lost to players spending on the disabled list. The last piece on this slide that I want to mention, and this might be the most recognizable to you guys in the audience, is we've used the data and the information to do analysis to help inform our policy making. You may have noticed that we had the 7-day DL implemented last year for 2011. So now we have a 7-day DL that if you have a concussion, you're able to go on this 7-day DL you don't have to wait to be placed on the 15-day or the 60-day. And the really cool thing about this was that this really came out of our analytics efforts. We gathered a lot of information on concussions, and we looked at it, and we calculated the average number of days that a player missed due to a concussion. And it turned out that the 15-day and 60-day construct that we had for the disabled list didn't apply to concussions. There were really two universes. It was a player either got healthy after 4 to 6 days, or the player was out for a significant period of time, probably the entire season. So the concept that you had to go on the disabled list when you only needed 4 to 6 days to get healthy didn't really make a lot of sense for concussions. And so what we did is we went to our medical community and we said, let's create a 7-day DL where teams can be encouraged to place these players on the DL so they can get healthy and return to play quicker. And it yielded a great result. We had a lot of benefits out of that last year, among our medical staff. So with that, I hope that was informative and helpful. And I'll turn it back over to Larry, who I think will announce our next speaker.
So as we continue our look at how leagues provide value to clubs on the business side, I'm going to turn it over to Valerie Camillo at the National Basketball Association with the team marketing and business operations, who's going to give us a look at sponsorship analytics. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Well, good afternoon. I'm Valerie Camillo, and I'm with the NBA's Team Marketing and Business Operations Group, also known as TeamBO. Before I share some case studies around the work we do for sponsorship analytics, I'd like to just provide a brief overview of TeamBO to give you a feel for how we apply our work across the broader team business. So, Team Marketing and Business Operations. It is a liaison between the league office and the 58 teams that comprise the NBA, the WNBA, and the D-League. And like many great ideas, it began as a twinkle in the eye of Mr. David Stern and Adam Silver, who believed that while we were competing on the court, off the court, we were part of the same business enterprise. And sharing best practices would be helpful to all the teams. And not only would they would be helpful specifically because what worked to sell tickets or sponsorship in Atlanta likely would work as well in Memphis. And so with that, TeamBO was born. And the structure of TeamBO is very similar to a consulting firm, and we can best be thought of as similar to a McKinsey or a Bain or a Booz Allen type organization. We're an internal consultancy on behalf of our teams. And in that role, we work to drive revenue, increase profitability, and overall transform and innovate the business of sports on behalf of our teams. Now, our structure is similar to the structure of our team. So we have a group that's focused on ticket sales, sponsorship, marketing and digital, retention, all the way down the line. And against this basic operating structure, we have two cross-cutting, cross-functional activities. The first of which is our account management function. Each and every team has a dedicated account rep that is responsible for all the things we talked about, the best practice sharing, the day-to-day relationship management, and so forth. The second cross-cutting function is strategy and analytics, and this is the group that I lead. And we're responsible for customer, marketing, predictive, and financial analyses. We do this through research, reporting, and the type of case studies and quantitative projects of which I'm going to show you a few samples. Now, when we typically come to conferences like this and we see the presentation of business analytics in sports, it's almost always focused on the ticketing side. So at the NBA, we're much broader than that, and I wanted to bring with you some samples of something other than ticketing. And so today we're going to focus on some of our case studies around sponsorship. And 3 in particular. First, I'm going to share with you some of the work that we're doing to provide our teams with data and analysis that supports their sales activities, to help them simply sell more sponsorship. The second is around sponsorship measurement. At the league, we do a number of things to help our teams understand and communicate the value that they're providing to brands that are partnering with our teams. And then our final case study is going to be around our 7-figure deal analysis. These are our largest deals among our teams, and we wanted to understand the characteristics and factors that made up our largest partners so that we could sell more of them. So first, to sales benchmarking. So, we often sit and brainstorm with our teams to think about what information would be helpful to them, what data, what analytics. And we had a conversation not too long ago where we said, what would be interesting, helpful for you to know? And this is some of the information that they provided for us. They said it would be very helpful for us to know what the top categories are. Simply put, across the NBA, where are sponsors spending? What industries are they coming out of? And this is important because 80% of all of the money spent on sponsorship in the NBA comes from our top 50 categories. And in addition to just knowing what those categories are, they were interested in knowing what the yield was. So if you were a team and you were going to pitch a particular banking partner, was the average banking partner spending across the league $200,000 or $2 million? That'd be helpful information to know as you're putting together your pitch. And then specifically to that team, they wanted to understand in terms of their own performance and how much sponsorship they were selling against these categories and this yield. How did they rank against the league average and against like markets? Like markets being teams that had similar market demand factors or team performance. In addition to categories, there was interest as well in understanding inventory and price. Now you might say, everybody has the same inventory, right? They have courtside signage, they have naming rights. Why would that be of interest to them? Well, our teams are constantly innovating what they sell in terms of inventory. In terms of physical assets, everything from the mop that might wipe the court, sometimes that's being sponsored for some teams, all the way down to platforms, concepts, and ideas. The New York Knicks, for example, recently partnered with Foxwoods, it's a casino in Connecticut, to sell just the last 5 minutes of the game. It's the Foxwood Final Five. So sharing those ideas, be they physical assets, new ideas, be they concepts or platforms, is beneficial to our teams. And then also understanding what they're selling for. And then finally, new opportunities. Our teams always want to know what's the hot new category, what's the hot trend, what companies are starting to spend in sponsorship. So with all of these interests for analytics that were presented to us, we created the two reports, the first of which is our STAR report, our sponsor team allocation report. And we produce it quarterly. It answers all the information around the categories that we discussed. And it's available to our teams through our internet portal, which we call TeamNet. And so every team, every employee at every team can get a live look into all the data and analysis that we're doing, all of our reports, all of our studies, STAR being one of them. We handle the inventory questions as well as some of the new opportunities through our annual rate card summary, where again, we provide all the insights into inventory and pricing. So that's some of the work we're doing around sales benchmarking. Now, sponsorship measurement. We do a lot of different things around sponsorship measurement, but perhaps none bigger than the work we do with Turnkey Intelligence. Through Turnkey, we do a series of surveys to help understand the value that our teams are providing to the brands that they partner with. We administer these surveys 3 times over the course of the year, at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the season. And we're looking to observe changes in both behaviors and perceptions on behalf of our fans. And we want to compare that to what's going on in the general population. So what are some of the things that we're interested in measuring? Well, we look at the basics, things like sponsor recall, familiarity with the brand, affinity for the brand, but we also go deeper, and we try to get down to understanding how revenue is being impacted. How are purchases of our fans changing in terms and consideration of this particular brand? What are the value of our fans? And not in broad demographic terms, just that they're male and they're wealthy or what have you, but are they particular consumers of a certain category? And would this be interesting for an automotive company to know? Are they big QSR spenders and the like? We're also interested in knowing the direct revenue that's provided by some of our promotions. If you go to a game, you may get a coupon for a taco or a pizza. How much revenue does that drive back to the particular brand? And if this was the first time you've ever gone to that particular taco vendor, pizza vendor, what is the lifetime customer value that you're providing, that we're providing to that team, and having this particular new customer be put into the system? And then finally, brand perceptions. How is our relationship with a particular brand helping to change the understanding in our fans' minds around that particular brand and their attributes? So I want to show 2 deep dives into the specific work we've done. And the first will be on the impact on purchase behaviors. So there was a particular grocery pizza brand that was working with one of our teams, and affinity was off the charts. Everyone was saying they had this great affinity. It was a long-term partner of the team. And we were interested in knowing, well, how is that translating into sales? So we asked the question. We said, if you've consumed pizza, if you've bought pizza within the last 3 months, what brand did you buy? And these were the results. 69% of the folks that answered that question, in the affirmative said, we bought it from this particular pizza company, which is great. We could go back, we could communicate that to the brand, a wonderful finding. But how do we know that this wouldn't be the case if the sponsorship wasn't there? And that's where our 3-phase methodology helps to tell the story. At the beginning of the season, when we asked that same question, only 56% of the fans were saying that they were consuming this particular pizza brand. And over the course of the season, it grew to 69%. And because we were also surveying the general population, and you can see that their consumption, as represented by the white bar, remained relatively flat, we can say that even if there was a general promotion going on in the marketplace, the consumption of the general population wasn't moving. There's something going on here with our fans, and it allows us to tell a very powerful story around how our partnership is working effectively. And again, none of these cases in isolation tell the whole story. It's part of a larger conversation, a recap and a sales discussion that our teams are having, supported by measurement and research. The second piece of sponsorship measurement that I'd like to share from our turnkey work is around brand perceptions and how we're transforming that. Now, when we enter into new relationships with partners, we ask them, what are the brand attributes? What is your brand known for? And in this particular case, for this casino partner, they told us the 5 things you see down the left-hand side. They said, well, we've got the best dining options, we've got best entertainment, table gaming, loyalty program, all of these things. So we surveyed against them, and as you can see, represented by the red bars, our fans across the board think higher than the general population in terms of associating these attributes with this particular casino, which is a great thing. But we knew more than that. We also knew how the brand was activating in Arena. Specifically, on the signage that they had in Arena, be it digital signage or static signage on the concourse, they had signs up over the course of the season that were pushing the entertainment acts that were coming, that were talking about how great the restaurants were. And if you look carefully, in those areas where they were activating, the red bar is outstripping the general population, the white bar, by an even larger amount, which was this great conversation that we could go back and have with partners and say, it's sometimes very difficult to get to the value of signage in a very specific way, but this gave us some proof that these messages on the signage were sticking in the mind of the fans that were coming through the building. It also helped us identify areas where they might want a message for next year. Maybe next year your messages become about the table games and the loyalty programs. So that's our work with Turnkey. It's not all the measurement we do. We also work with Repucom. I know many of you in the room from various teams and league also work with Repucom, but I want to show you the ways that we're applying it that might be somewhat innovative or different. For those of you that don't know Repucom, they provide a value for media impressions. So you can see on that picture, Andrew Bogut, Milwaukee Bucks, he's fouled out of the game. He's walking off court. He's probably getting heckled there, it looks like, as he goes. And above his head, you can see a sign for Potawatomi Bingo Casino. And Potawatomi might be interested in knowing, what's the value of that? All the times that my logo appears on screen. And so one way that they can do that is through Repucom, because Repucom has a formula that looks at the number of time a logo appears during a game, how long it's on the screen, how big it is, a number of other factors, and they'll provide a media value. So the way we've applied that has come in some interesting ways, and I want to take you locally to an example from the Boston Celtics, who entered into a relationship with Repucom, understood the media value, and I want to draw your attention to what they're doing with their courtside signage. So that's courtside signage. It's shorter than it is at most of our arenas for most of our teams. In most cases, courtside signage is usually comprised of the distance between the red bars. You see Boston's done something differently. They've shortened it. They've put 4 seats on each side. And they did this because when they looked at the Repucom data, they saw that the action taking place on the court was more often in the backcourt near the baskets than it was in the half court. And so instead, with those 4 seats they moved from the corners, they put signage. And when they sold this and communicated the new calculated media impression value of this, they were able to get 30% more in value out of Ford than they were able to do before, just based on media impression. But it didn't stop there. There's another piece of this, which is the ticket sales piece. The seats that you see at half court are more valuable and sell for a higher amount than the corners. So there's also a ticket revenue benefit. So it's one of the creative ways we're applying our Repucom data. Now our final case study, 7-figure deal analysis. When we were looking at our largest deals across our teams, we found an interesting fact, which won't seem perhaps uniquely self-evident, but we'll see. And that is that it is almost impossible to get to be one of our highest revenue-making teams without a lot of big deals. That's, well, okay, that makes sense, right? But what we really proved was that it's almost impossible to nickel and dime your way there by collecting hundreds and hundreds of partners that are made up of $25,000, $50,000 deals. You needed some big fish, and some big fish in addition to your naming rights partner. So knowing that this was important to our team's success, we wanted to do two things. We wanted to help our teams understand how they were performing and ranking in terms of selling big deals, and then we wanted to understand the characteristics of sponsors that were investing this amount of money so that we could help our teams sell more. So we are as I mentioned, an internal consultancy, and so we have a 4-box. Everybody has 4-box in consulting. And let me walk you through just a quick overview of what this is. So along the x-axis, you have the number of 7-figure deals going from low to high. The y-axis is the strength of the corporate base going from strong to weak. And the reason that we just didn't count up the number of 7-figure deals and say, okay, New York has 10 and New Orleans has 1, is because that wouldn't be a fair comparison. Because New York has a lot more Fortune 500 companies than New Orleans does, they only have 1. So we needed a relative comparison for them to understand how they were performing. And so if they were in that top right quadrant, where they had a large number of 7-figure deals and they were in a relatively weak market, they would be overperforming. And conversely, if a team had a small number of 7-figure deals and they were in a strong market, well, that would be, as we don't like to say underperforming in consulting, we say things like an area of opportunity. If they had a few number of 7-figure deals and they were in a weak market, well, that might be what you'd expect. They'd be at par with market, but we were interested then in giving them information that would help shift them to the right so they could overperform. And if they were, say, like a New York, and they were in a big market and they had a lot of 7-figure deals, so then they'd be capitalizing on market potential, but then we wanted to give them information that helped them sell even more. So we ranked all 30 of our teams, and I've had to blind out the team data, and we provided this back to them to give them insights into how they were performing. And you can imagine the presidents and heads of sponsorship that were in the area of opportunity quadrant were very interested in seeing this data and understanding that perhaps this was an area that they needed to work on. The size of the circle represents the total amount of sponsorship revenue for that particular team. And it bears the point that I made at the beginning, which is if you really want to have a lot of sponsorship revenue, you can see they're all to the right side. You need to have a lot of these big deals. So once we provided the ranking, we analyzed all the deals we had. We looked at factors like deals that we lost. Why did we lose them for big deals? Deals that we retained. What did they look like? What was the assets in them? What was the relationship like? We created a report that we provided back to our teams to help them understand how to retain and sell 7-figure deals. So unfortunately, I can't share that data just because a lot of it is confidential and we can't give away all of our secrets, but suffice it to say it's helping us sell a good number more of these deals, and we'll continue to do so in the coming years. So that's 3 case studies from sponsorship analytics. Our strategy and analytics group does a great deal more than that. We certainly do things on the ticketing side. We've been at the forefront of working with our teams on variable and dynamic pricing. We are doing a lot of work around behavioral marketing, where we're putting different marketing tests in the marketplace and seeing which ones drive more revenue for us. We're doing negotiation modeling support. So if a team is entering into a new lease negotiation, contract with a vendor, contract with a ticketing partner, we're providing them information and models that help them understand trade-offs and value, and a host of other projects that we're working on. Now, because this conference is sponsored by ESPN, of course, we have to have what's next, and we've got a lot of, suffice to say, geeks on our team. We sit around and we brainstorm what are our next year's projects, and where can we take this down the road. And these are just a sample from a recent brainstorm we had of things that we're interested in doing in the coming months and years. And operational analytics is a big part of it. We're interested in figuring out how to speed the flow of fans on the concourse through concession lines and the like. We're also interested in building predictive recruiting models so that when our teams are interviewing a ticket sales candidate, they can have better information about what things to look for that would help to predict their success in the future as a ticket seller. So this is just a sampling of some of the things that we have on tap. And there's a number of us here from TIMBA this weekend. We'd be happy to talk to you in more depth about projects we're working on, projects we plan to work on. We look forward to having the chance to meet you all over the course of the weekend. Thank you.
Our third look at the way a league operates, we're going to turn it over to Bobby Gallo and Brian LaFamina at the National Football League's Corporate Development Department to give us a look at team pricing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Larry. Thank you guys very much. I'm Brian LaFamina with the National Football League's Club Business Development Group. And I am Bobby Gallo with the National Football League's Club Business Development Group.
And you needed two of us because combined we have the same IQ as all the other presenters, so we're going to try to tag team this issue.
Thank you, Brian.
Similar to Teambo, we work in in-house consultancy to all 32 NFL clubs, and we're there to help with all the local revenue streams, whether that be sponsorship, ticketing, or luxury suites, you name it, local media rights agreements. We get involved and help them when they need help. So
I think a better way to say it is whatever Valerie said.
yeah, whatever Valerie said. Because both of us have NBA backgrounds, we pretty much just try to copy everything that Teambo does. So hopefully we're doing a good job. Today we want to just present to you guys a case study on some pricing analysis that we do for our clubs and trying to help them get to the optimal price points in their stadiums. While we are involved with all these different revenue streams, the bottom line is that if ticketing isn't right, everything else is much harder to get right. So we focus a lot of our time on ticketing. And as you've heard today in a number of the other panels and over the last few years, there's a lot of emphasis being put on dynamic pricing and variable pricing in our business right now. Obviously, the airlines have used dynamic pricing for a long time. Hotels have used dynamic pricing for a long time. And as you see on this slide, even State Street Brats in Madison, Wisconsin is using variable pricing to price their beer on different times of the day and different days of the year. So with all this variable pricing going on, Bobby, why don't you take us through how the NFL employs variable and dynamic pricing?
Sure, stay with me on this. We do not variable price or dynamically price our tickets, which is probably even more of a reason why we actually have to get our pricing and scaling across our stadiums right. So we're joking about dynamic and variable, but because we don't do that, it's even more important for us to scale our stadiums and optimize our revenue accordingly. So we've built out the following pricing framework, as you can see here on the screen. It's broken out into 3 buckets. As Valerie said, consultants are big on threes. Everybody remembers things in threes easier. So demand, inventory, and structure are the 3 buckets that we use, and we'll focus primarily today on demand, customer segmentation, differentiated pricing, optimized scaling and pricing across your stadiums. And as you heard, I think David Gill say this morning, if you price your stadium right, the fans will come. And we believe that, okay? We believe that, but there are a couple other pillars that we believe in as well, and Brian will take you through those.
Right, so we can get our pricing spot on. If we had every single price in the stadium where it should be and perfect in relation to all the other seats in the stadium, that'd be great. But that doesn't mean you're going to optimize your revenue, and it certainly doesn't mean you're going to fill your stadium. So whenever we go to a club and we talk to them about this issue, we want to make sure we always remind them that the other 2 buckets work in concert with everything else that we're doing on the pricing side. So we have to make sure from an inventory standpoint, we're delivering customized product offerings that are going to hit different segments of your fan base. We have to make sure that we're creating meaningful programs because as somebody mentioned earlier today, I think it was Scott, said that he didn't know if there would be a season ticket product 10 years from now. Well, we have to differentiate why it's important to be a season ticket holder and what that relationship between a club and the ticket holder is. So we're always thinking about ways that we can create meaningful programs for our ticket holders and obviously the branding that supports all of those initiatives. And then as important, if not more important than some of these others, is staffing. Do we have the right staffing levels? Do we have the right people in those jobs? Do we have a functioning database and a working CRM system that we can leverage so we can get the most out of our salespeople? What technology tools are we using in addition to that, whether it's a scoring system for leads or something along those lines? And then as a sales guy, compensation strategy. What is going to move the needle for your salespeople? Do we have the right compensation strategy so that we can align our organizational goals with the goals of our salespeople? So when we get all of that right, we think we can optimize it. But for today, we're really just going to focus on the demand part of the equation.
Right, and so if you look at the right side of the screen there, these are, as Brian said, this is an actual real-life case study from one of our clubs across the NFL. And what you see on the right side of the screen are the objectives or goals for that club. Achieve 90% season ticket holder sell-through, so they wanted to leave 10% of their inventory for for group sales, individual tickets, so on and so forth. Improve season ticket holder value, maximize their revenue, obviously, increase renewal rates, and then I think what's probably most important, create a sustainable model. Here we go, okay. And then so to take it to the next level or to get to a place where we can help the club do that, we'll take you through quickly what our pricing study process is. I don't know why this is jumping. So, I'm not touching
Remember that IQ thing? You're seeing it now.
I'm not touching it. So the pricing study process is as you see here. First phase is to identify, okay, and what we do is we collect 2 to 3 years of ticketing data, maybe sometimes even more if the club can provide it to us, around sellout percentages, renewal percentages, no-show rates, individual ticket sales, you name it, we collect it. We then analyze all the data, share the observations and insights with the club. So we go back to the club. Before the pricing study is complete, we go back and share what our insights and observations were so we can get some additional feedback from the club. Okay? Then we create the pricing frameworks that we're going to actually build the pricing study out around. And then we'll share those with the clubs as well. And then probably most importantly, again, last but not least, we actually help implement and support the recommendations and frameworks that we provide to the club.
Seems like a lot of data, Bobby, so why don't you take them through what the actual template looks like for 2 seconds?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So this is an actual data request template. It's like we almost planned this out and rehearsed it. It's an actual data request template. And again, just all the different metrics that I just mentioned to all of you, season ticket holder renewal rates, no-show rates, things like that, we get back in the form of Excel, and the data request template looks like this.
So from there, we'll analyze that data. Actually, we won't analyze the data, but other people in our office will actually analyze the data. And then we'll come back with some key findings. So in this specific case, what we found out was that this club had been renewing at about 95% every single year, which is a great number. However, when you're sitting in a 70,000 seat stadium, it does still mean that you have a lot of tickets to sell, even at 95% renewal. So in this case, they had lost 6,400 seats since 2008. They actually had 7,800 seats through attrition lost, and then they were able to sell an additional 1,400. Now, they were offsetting some of those losses by increased individual game seats, but they were not filling the bucket as quickly as they were losing season ticket holders. So this is kind of, as strong a club as this is, and it is a very strong club, there were some cracks in the ice, and we had to try to help them figure out how we were going to address it. The interesting thing here is that the place they were seeing the most trouble was in their cheapest seats. So the lowest price point to get in was where they were really seeing the most problems. So as we were thinking about how we could go back to them and suggest possible frameworks, these are some of the key findings that led us to what we were going to offer up to them next.
So from there, what we start to do is we actually build out and create heat maps in Excel. So that's what you're looking at here. And this particular heat map is built out around 2011 demand. Demand can vary. The criteria that we use can vary. But in this particular case, it's based on season ticket holder percent of capacity, because that's what was best for this particular market. We could end up using season ticket holder renewal rates, total sell-through percentages, you name it. But this is a heat map based on 2011 demand for this particular club, built out in Excel. And as you can see, the colors and the legend at the bottom represent various percentages and sell-through levels.
So in addition to the data that we collect from the club, and while we quipped earlier about the fact that there really is no dynamic pricing in the NFL, that doesn't mean there's not a dynamic market for tickets in this particular market. So what we do is we take a look at the secondary market and what's going on there. And we pull really where the different seats have value, take a look at the existing price levels, understand how they're performing in relation to each other. And these are some of the other data points that we pull in before we go back and try to make a recommendation on a framework. Another data point that we pull in is the velocity of sales. So while it's really important to understand what seats are selling, we like to look at when are they selling. So, if you have a section that happens to be moving the last few seats a couple of days before the game, that'll tell you one thing. And if you're blowing through all those seats the day you go on sale, it's telling you something else. So we think this is a really important data point for us to pay attention to. The other thing is within a certain price point, even if it's the same price point, which seats in that section or in that price point are moving first. So again, earlier today, I think Scott O'Neill mentioned the fact that they were thinking about pricing aisle seats more expensively than seats in the middle of a row. And I think Bobby has an opinion on that one, so I'd love to hear it.
I do. I actually disagree with Scott, and that's probably why I don't work at Madison Square Garden and for Scott anymore. But I actually think the middle of the row is more valuable, because if you're sitting at the end or on the aisle, you always have to get up for the people getting out of the row in the middle, as opposed to being in the middle, you don't have to get up for anybody. So Scott and I disagree on that one. But what we do agree on is there's value with each and every individual seat in your building.
And we can now, we can find it out by looking at this data, so we can figure out who's right. Is it Bobby or is it Scott?
Me.
I'm thinking Scott, but go ahead.
This is you, Bri.
So yield. So the other data point we pull in is, you can have a more expensive seat that's actually yielding less money than a less expensive seat yielding more money than a more expensive seat. So we want to take a look and make sure that we're getting the most out of every price point that we possibly can. And if we find a situation where a less expensive seat is yielding more, that's a red flag for us. We think we've missed a price point. We have to go back and we really have to check it.
Right. And so the last thing we'll do, and just to make sure we're on the same page, we showed you 3 or 4 different Excel models or heat maps. When we present to a club, there could be 30 Excel models and/or heat maps within a pricing presentation. But the last thing we will do and provide to the club, and we partner with a company called SeatGeek to do this, is we'll provide them with a virtual, interactive, dynamic, whatever you want to call it, heat map tool that they can use. Looks like this. It's a representation of their stadium. Has all the different metrics that we just went through, season ticket holder renewal percentages, everything that we would want to track and collect back from the club. And what they can do is dynamically look at how their stadium is selling through or how they're renewing in a particular section. They can aggregate all of the different data points. And what happens when they do that is the colors on the map change, literally as they're clicking through. So it's a great high-level tool so that when clubs are trying to formulate their prices and they're presenting to ownership or they're discussing internally, they can throw something like this on the screen and literally sit there for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it might be, and walk through a heat map like this that's dynamic.
So we go through all that work, and then we deliver a potential pricing framework to the club. So in this particular case, we thought that the club should introduce a single game ticket price above the season ticket holder price. And while that's fairly common throughout the sports world, this club happens not to do that. The reason we think that's important is it emphasizes the savings and the value for being a season ticket holder. We also wanted to make sure they were capturing the additional revenue opportunities that they had. We really felt that they had some pricing power in the best seats in the house that they hadn't been taking, so we suggested that they be more aggressive there than they had been in previous years.
Additionally, as you can see here, we suggested an entry price point below $40. So it's not about just going up in price. When we look at teams and the data that they provide to us, it could also be going down in price as well. Group ticket products, so we suggested a group sales product for this particular club. They had never done group sales before. Again, our league's a little bit different than the NBA and the NHL from that perspective. And then we even dig into internal holds and comps and allotments across each and every team. And this particular club, for whatever reason, they were set on allocating their internal holds at a very high demand area in their stadium. So obviously the recommendation there was to try to move those holds out and drive and maximize your revenue in what we call prime real estate.
And again, we don't take the position that we're going to tell them what to do. We just want to point this out to them because it may be something that has just been institutional and going on for years, and maybe they don't realize the revenue impact that these decisions have. So they may be doing it for a completely, perfectly legitimate reason. We just want to make sure that we're highlighting it to them. So the next thing we always do is try to lay out what the potential impact is. So if they were to employ this pricing framework that we just put in front of you guys, at the current levels, if they don't sell one more ticket, they see an incremental $1.5 million by putting this pricing framework in place. If it actually helped the sales process and they were able to get back up to 100% sell-through, there's $4.3 million that they could generate. What's interesting is the bottom point, which is even if the sales levels fell to 90%, they're still generating an incremental $1.1 million. So, we think that obviously having the right pricing model gets more people in the stadium, but as importantly, we think it optimizes your revenue possibilities from your ticketing business.
So just in summary, some final thoughts, as you can see here on the screen. And I think we touched on each of these points throughout, but number one, understand your data. Number two, make sure you understand your fans and what they want. Take a holistic view of the venue, so make sure you're collecting as much data, and every data point that you have, make sure that you're analyzing it as best you can. Match pricing to value proposition. We focus a lot on value in our league and what we're offering to our season ticket holders and fans. And then last but not least, use price to influence the fan behavior that you're looking to drive. And again, these are the 5 things that we try to drive across our 32 clubs or the clubs that ask us to help them with their pricing models.
That's it?
So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
So now we're going to transition to take another look. We're going to move to John Faris with Live Analytics, which is a Ticketmaster company that's dedicated to business analytics. We're going to have a look at fan prospect and retention modeling. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see if I can. So thanks. My name is John Faris. I oversee a group we started about a year ago. It's called Live Analytics, and it's a standalone division within Ticketmaster, and it's very analogous to what the leagues are doing. So we are providing advisory consultancy services to our clients, which is essentially all the venues that use Ticketmaster, the teams for that, and it's a very simple charter, but it's almost the exact same charter. We're obviously taking a ticketing perspective, but it's how do you take all this data, how do you apply all these analytic techniques to help the venues, the teams, sell more tickets? And it crosses everything, but for us, it starts with two things, and they were just talked about on the previous slide, getting as holistic a view as possible of the fan, and getting as holistic a view as possible of the event. And it all starts with that. And from that, you can then get into targeting and pricing, really just about anything. But what I'm going to talk about here are two things we do that are custom models, and we provide this for the teams, and the teams are doing this with us. They're also doing it with some other players and on their own. And you're starting to see it happening more and more. A lot of the teams are now adopting these practices and are getting more sophisticated. So the first one is prospect models. The second one is retention models. They're exactly what they sound like. So the prospect models are all about figuring out who are the best prospects to move through that funnel from occasionally buying a ticket to being a repeat purchaser every year to actually being a plan holder, which is really the lifeblood and the holy grail. And the second one is, okay, I've got all these season ticket holders. Help me understand who's at risk next season, who may not renew, so we can do care programs, save programs for them, but also help me with the other side of that, which is of my season ticket holders, there's probably some percentage of those who have more purchasing power and are more likely to upgrade, so help me identify them, and I'll reach out to them in a different way. So in both cases, it starts with this foundational layer that is not very glamorous and not very exciting, but is critical, which is getting all of your data in one place so that you can actually make sense of it and do something with it. And so luckily, right when I started, Ticketmaster had already embarked on this. I think they had 80 different databases that all had different pieces of information about a customer that had gone through and bought at Ticketmaster. And so, multiple millions of dollars were spent by us just getting it all into one place so you could get that holistic view. And it's no easy feat. But the other piece of it is getting every imaginable attribute that you can find about each individual fan. So we've been able to, and we partner with the teams on this, so the teams have a lot of data they throw into the mix. We throw in data that we know uniquely as Ticketmaster across their entire purchasing footprint. You've got third parties that provide quite a lot of information about demographics, psychographics around all this. So you're talking about just a database where you're adding more and more columns to really understand the fans. Things around gender, age, purchasing power, whether they live in the city versus suburban, rural, and then a lot of things around their actual transactional behavior, which is the second set. And so now you've got all of this, you've put the plumbing in place, and what we normally do, and this is an example we did with one of the NBA teams, just to get started, is just segment these in some pretty basic, simple segments, and look across the variables and see kind of what pops, and get an idea at the aggregate level of how do these bases differ when I look across the segments. Now, ultimately, you want to get every piece of this down to the individual fan level. You want to treat, if you could, every fan differently, but it does help to start and look in the more aggregate. So here, it's a simple but pretty powerful way to split it. Look at your individual game buyers, compare them to your plan buyers that are doing a half season or mini plans, and then compare it to your season ticket buyers. And I just pulled a couple variables for this team. You see a pretty big skew where you are much less likely to be a full season buyer if you've got a working woman in the household or you have children present in the household. And that probably, it intuitively makes sense in terms of how much time you have to actually go to a season worth of games on this. Another one that's pretty intuitive is just the distance to the venue. So the season ticket holders, 84% of them were within 25 miles of this venue, and a lot less when you look at the single game purchasers. They're willing to come out from a further distance, but they're not going to do it all the time. The bottom are some variables that are more around purchasing power. So, an obvious one is to get the household income of the fans and look across them. Not surprisingly, you see the plan holders with higher household income. That half season is in fact higher than the full season on this. we work our way through these variables, and what we found is that discretionary income is a better proxy usually than household income. And how the third parties get some of these data is interesting, but this is one where this is taking out sort of all your monthly expenses. So it's not just how much you're making, but it's actually how much you have left over that you spend on something like a live event, which is a discretionary purchase. And then the third one is a score that's used a lot in catalogs, merchandising, and retail. It's an RFM score, and it's a very simple way to take transaction patterns and transaction history and get it into a score. And so the R stands for recency. If you've touched the venue more recently, you're going to have a higher score. F is for frequency, so if you buy a lot, you get a higher score, obviously. And the M is for monetary value. The larger the purchase size itself, the higher your score. And so this lets you score people from 0 to 1,000, and then you can then net that out. And not surprisingly, the people with higher RFM scores are more likely to be bigger purchasers. So that's all standard scores, just looking at the variables pair one by one and seeing what it all makes sense. To be honest, a lot of teams just don't have currently the staff or the resources on hand that they can do custom models. And so you can use those individual metrics and you can cross a couple of them, and that can give you some initial segmenting. Ideally, you go all the way to doing a custom model where you get these variables and you really see what matters for your specific team across these. And so what we set up here, we start with all the data, that foundational layer. Oh. When will it stop? Sorry about this. Okay. I will not touch this. So starting with that foundational layer, okay, I can't do this. You killed me. What did you do? I may need you to do the slide advancing. Can you guys just advance it for me? Is that possible? Slide 180, I don't know. Keep going. Okay, back. All right, and then can you just turn this off? Just. All right, sorry about that. I guess I feel better that I wasn't the only one that had that happen. Yeah. I did it just for you. Okay, so we actually set up gates or funnels. So the whole name of the game here is taking someone that touches the venue or the arena once in a while and saying, all right, which are the guys that really do have the potential to be plan holders, and let me go after them. And so we set up scores, and we actually set these gates up where the D list is probably your worst prospects. C list are people that are likely to come multiple times, but they're probably not great prospects for being a plan holder, all the way through to the A list, which is the best people in your database based on looking across all these variables for buying season tickets. And why does this all matter? Well, it gets back to that idea of segmenting and targeting and using scarce sales resources to go after the right folks. So kind of the days of blasting the your entire database with one plain message are over. And what it's really about is tailoring specific programs where you're going to go after that A list in a very different way. You probably email the D list, and you may even focus on something that's around a value play or a last-minute sale. That's not what you want to be sending to anyone that's on the A list. All right, can we advance? Okay. And what we do after we run the models is we create these tables, which I always like these tables. There's a lot of data on here. I'm not going to go through it all, obviously, but the color coding gives you a sense of, across all the variables that we've scored and looked at, which ones really mattered and how much did they matter. And so in this case, we've done blue, meaning it's an under-index. So if it's a variable that's blue, it means that if you fall into that category, you're less likely to be a good prospect, and if it's red, you're more likely. And so some of the stuff we talked about before, you'll see on age, actually 18 to 24 is a slight over-index. They are actually more likely to be season ticket holders. And then it goes into a bit of a trough for the next 10 years or 15 years, probably because the people are quite busy and they don't have the time to be going to all the games. And then over 55, you see this bright red where those are very good prospects. And so you do this across demographic variables, lifestyle, transactional. You see the interactions of these variables. These personics groups are nice segmentation schemes that are done by a company called Axiom that can simplify basically take the whole US population, puts them into 60 categories, and then you can say, oh, you know what, these people that are called aging upscale index quite well. Let me figure out a way to market to them and maybe even get additional prospects that fall into that group. Can we go advance? So those were, I was just showing some actuals for an NBA team. This is an NHL example, and this is kind of the money slide because if you look at the right, there was a team that we worked with that had a very large database, and they had just reconfigured the arena a little bit, so they'd opened up some additional premium seats. And so we thought this was a perfect opportunity, and what we set up with them was an A/B test where we said, use your old methodology, and it was, it wasn't just this blast everything. They were actually using a couple variables, mostly around household wealth, to format their list. And then we said, and then use this custom model that's more targeted. And so we came up and said, there's actually a much smaller targeted list that we think we should use. So it was about a third the list size, which is this top right. And it had 3.3x the conversion rate. So actually the smaller list generated more revenue when they did this test. And again, really valuable because you're not burning through your prospect list and you can send the right messages only to the right people. Can we jump? So this is now just flipping over to the retention model. That was all about prospecting, finding new season ticket holders. This is now keeping the season ticket holders that you have, and same concepts and methodologies. You start with that same underlying data set. You're going to have a lot less data with season ticket holders just because it's a smaller number of people through that, and we do two things. The first one is we do a score for are they at risk or not, and we score that through to 100. And then for the people that are not at risk, which is equally important, do I want to go after them and try to upgrade them? So is this an opportunity to move them down in the arena or potentially buy more tickets? All starts with that same layer of getting all the underlying data, getting it all in one place for this. And can we jump one more? And so here's something we did with a team just at the end of this last season going into their renewals. And the bar chart is that same data that I showed with the color codes. I'm just laying it out a little bit differently. The dotted line is the average renewal rate across all the season ticket holders. And then you just see the different variables and the ones that matter more for saying you're going to be a good case for renewal, and then you have ones that are predictors that you're going to be pretty heavily at risk. And every one of these which we do with the team is custom, but we do see some themes across teams. The very bottom one here, first-time plan buyers. So that first year is always this probationary period, and the renewal rates of those first-year buyers are always generally lower. So it's an especially important group to target, to do extra campaigns, think about extra touch points for, because you'd much rather keep them than have to go find a new season ticket holder through this. Some of the other stuff matches some of the things we showed on other slides. That top one is discretionary income index, so having a high income index means that you're more likely to renew. You just have that purchasing power, something around the age and having the free time around all of this. And the last slide. So really just final thoughts on this. And we talked to a lot of teams and a lot of other clients about this, but the modeling and the scoring is really just step one in this, and it's really just the start. This really is a journey for us and the teams because getting all that data in one place, it's not trivial. Once you've done that, then actually being able to segment your offers, segment your customer base, it takes a lot of work. I mean, think about being able to do you create 5 segments, you want to do 5 specific promotions, you might want 5 different creatives on that. It can turn into a ton of work for the team. So you really need the tools to be able to do something with this where you can segment and target. And that becomes an important building block. We're sort of the arms dealers of giving all this underlying data, but if you can't segment and target with it, you're not going to get value out of it. And equally important is getting data back into the results, so this feedback loop. If you don't have a feedback loop, the models don't get any better, and you don't know what really worked and what didn't work. Often, when you do these and you have some group, you think this is a can't-miss segment, and then they don't convert, that can be one of the most insightful things and can set you up to be much smarter for the next year. And the final point, which I don't think we're there yet with the work we've done, but we're hoping to as we get into the second, third year of these, is these additional variables, and the variables are really on actionable levers. So if you think about a lot of the stuff that was in here, it was distance or age or how much they spend. Teams can't do a lot about that. It's good to know, and they can segment. But as you flow into this, okay, we did a VIP event, and these are the people that came to that. So that's another variable in my database. Did they sign up for my email list? Do they answer customer surveys? Did they go to the shoot around or to the batting practice event that I did? Now you can start to see how those impact both prospects and retention, and you can see which programs are actually working and not working, and that's where the big win will be with this stuff. So that's all I had. I really appreciate being able to come to this. I think this is a great conference. I'm excited to be a part of it.